Hello, this is Angela Murjani from Kasturba Gandhi College in Secunderabad, and I'm inviting you once more to listen, watch and absorb as we enter into this second episode on the life of the man who set the world on wheels, the very inspirational Henry Ford himself. The world would never be the same again after that historic day in 1896 when Henry Ford, the man who would eventually set the world on wheels, drove through the streets of Detroit in his petrol-powered, spluttering, shuddering, very first motor car. He was not the first to invent such a vehicle. There were many others who had done similar works before him all over the world, but rather he changed the world through his rare combination of character traits and mechanical genius. Put together in him, he became a force to reckon with. And today, we are going to look at some length at these traits in the life of Henry Ford and how they helped him to become the man who would forever change the face of this world. France was, in fact, the first country to take to motoring in a big way. A newspaper arranged for a race of steam locomotives in the year 1894, 2 years before Henry Ford had put his first car on the road. The winner of this race tore to the finishing line at an astonishing speed for those days of 12 miles per hour. Only England was left behind in the race for manufacturing automobiles because of its ridiculous red flag law. This law required that a man waving a red flag walk in front of every steam locomotive that came down the road to warn people of its approach. Now, obviously, no automobile manufacturer would be interested in making a vehicle that could go only as fast as a man could walk. However, there were many people in England who wanted to own horseless carriages. These people either made them themselves or imported them from France. Shortly, the law was repealed and people were allowed to go about the streets in motor vehicles at the speed of 14 miles per hour. However, notwithstanding all this vehicular activity that was happening in Europe, none of it seemed to have been seen or heard of in America, where Henry Ford was painstakingly putting together his petrol-driven car in a shed behind his home. The credit, it seems, for introducing the motor car to his nation and then for making America the most motor-minded country in the world was reserved for Henry Ford. Henry Ford continued to go about the streets of Detroit in his vehicle, dropping nuts and bolts wherever he went. His car became a familiar sight to the people as he drove around the streets of Detroit, often stopping to get off as nuts and bolts fell off, nonchalantly picking them up and fixing them. Curious passers-by stopped to stare at him. Sometimes they cheered him on and sometimes they jeered at him, depending upon their mood. But Ford was never deterred by their criticism, nor was he ever spurred on by their encouragement. Inside of him, he had an inner vision that was guiding him all along. And this vision kept him riveted to his focus, which was to produce a vehicle that would carry people and things across the country of America at a price that was affordable and in a car that was dependable. On one occasion, the engine got so hot that it began to melt the soldering. That is when Henry Ford thought of installing a water tank on top of the engine, the first prototype for a cooling system in a car. On another occasion, his little son Edsel insisted that he should have a seat of his own in the car. Well, Henry Ford figured out an idea straight away. He took a plank and put it upon the box that carried the battery which charged the spark plugs. Voila! He had another seat in the car. And thus, inch by inch and step by step, he moved forward towards the achievement of the dream that was just guiding him on, which was at the center of his heart. Ford eventually sold this car for $200 and began working on a new model. His fellow engineers and contemporaries of the time didn't think much of his petrol-powered car. In fact, they thought it was a noisy and smelly contraption. They were all convinced that the future lay in a car that would be powered by electricity. But Henry Ford was totally sold out to the idea of a car driven by petrol, and he would take no other view into consideration, totally blocking out every other view that was contrary to the one that he held. He was able to convince a group of investors, and they all laid down a small sum of money for him to start a company that would produce 10 cars. Ford was 35 at the time. But the investors soon parted company with Ford because they did not believe in him spending huge amounts of time in perfecting his product, nor did they agree that he should spend money on buying expensive components that would produce a high-quality car. This did not bother Ford in the least, because he firmly believed that the money would start to pour in if only he had a good quality automobile to offer the discerning public of America. Ford's commitment to the highest standards of quality and his refusal to be hastened in his pursuit of excellence are both wonderful lessons for us in this modern-day world. It's only if we take our minds off the main focus that we will succumb to pressures at such times. However, if we keep to the focus and take a stand, we may find that it's costly in the short term, but the long-term dividends will definitely make it worthwhile for us. A well-known management mantra states, "Let the main thing be the main thing." The main thing for Henry Ford was to produce a vehicle that would be both affordable and durable, and nothing that his detractors told him could take him away or derail that one main aim and objective that he had held on to. He would not compromise with cheap quality products, nor hasten the process of the development of such a machine as was in his dream. Staying riveted to the main thing, or the point of focus, helped him to hold off all the pressure that was coming at him to use cheap components or to hasten the developmental process. Such actions would have derailed him from his main aim or objective. By holding on to his main aim and objective, Ford was able to realize his dream and enjoy the fruits of his success and achievements. Henry Ford had a rare knack for getting the right kind of publicity. It always proved very useful to him when he was about to launch a new vehicle or to popularize one that already existed. One winter day in 1900, he invited a reporter to take a ride with him on a new car. The journalist was swept off his feet and he reported it all over the newspapers. Swifter than a racehorse, it flew over the icy streets, the headlines screamed the next morning. Thrilling ride on the first ever Detroit-made automobile, another headline said. The reporter wrote in fancy terms about how he glided over the streets of Detroit at a phenomenal speed of 8 miles per hour. And then they glided over the asphalt at an amazing 25 miles per hour. Ford displayed all the tricks that he knew. By now, he had already devised the system of brakes, and so he brought the car to an astonishing stop, and then, almost as dramatically, he started it up again. He showed the reporter all his expertise at driving, making sharp turns and neat circles, exhibiting a total and complete control over the vehicle. To say that the reporter was impressed would be an understatement. He was completely blown away by this new vehicle and its amazing inventor. Through the newspaper articles, Ford's expertise as a driver had now become common knowledge to the public of America. He now decided to take part in a race. The World's Championship and first big automobile race was to be held outside of Detroit. 8,000 people were coming to view the race, and in the end, there were only 3 participants. The first was a Pittsburgh millionaire, and the second was America's well-known racing motorist, Alexander Winton, and the third was Henry Ford himself. As the race was about to begin, the Pittsburgh millionaire's car sprang a leak and he had to withdraw from the race. So it was left to Alexander Winton and Henry Ford. Henry Ford, in his 26 horsepower vehicle, was now going to challenge Winton in his 40 horsepower engine. At first, Ford's inexperience on a racetrack showed up against Winton's far more obvious expertise. But then suddenly there was a series of explosions that came out of Winton's car, and it got covered in a cloud of dust and came to a standstill. The mechanics rushed to help him, and although Winton did join the race again at a later stage, he was way behind Henry Ford. Henry Ford, all this while, was steadily making his way past up to the grandstand, and the crowd was wildly cheering and clapping for him as if he were the predestined hero and darling of the masses already. When Henry Ford was congratulated for his driving skills, he just waved all the compliments away. He gave the complete credit for winning the race to the car, and he clearly stated that the real winner of the race was the car. He also said very firmly that if Winton or anyone else had been driving his car, they would have won the race, because it really was the car and not he who had won that race. Even though Henry Ford was now a very famous man, he was still very far from making his dream a reality, the dream of establishing a factory for the mass production of cars. This was another novel idea that had caught Ford's imagination when he was just a 16-year-old runaway in the city of Detroit, working in the back room of a jeweler's shop, repairing watches in hiding from the customers. Way back then, he had figured out a mass production model to produce 2,000 watches a day at a cost of 30 cents a piece. He had even cut out some of the dies and planned some of the machinery. But someone came up to him with this pointer. They told him that unless he could organize a nationwide system of selling the product, he would never be able to get it off its feet. And Ford was stalled in the progress of this idea. But he had held on to it, and it came back to him right now. Even at this stage of his life, Ford was not able to sell his idea for the mass production of cars to any investors. All the investors thought that the car was a great idea for people who were sports crazy, or it would be a good luxury item to add to a rich man's collection. But this was not Ford's idea at all. Ford was thinking of a practical utility vehicle that would serve the average person in the United States and help them as a family to have a reliable, safe and economical means of transport. So Ford decided that since no investors were coming forward, he would have to do it himself. Henry Ford was the vice president of his company. The general manager of the company was Henry Ford. The chief engineer was Henry Ford, and Henry Ford was also the executive. And the superintendent? Yeah, if you guessed right, then you guessed Henry Ford. Henry Ford was 40 at the time. The ambitions of his project were far greater than the sum total of his capital, far bigger than the size of his premises, and much bigger than the size of the total number of his employees. The new company's ambition was far greater than the size of its capital, much larger than the size of its premises, and much bigger than the number of its employees. The new vehicle which Ford had in his mind conceived was called the Ford Mobile. The Ford Mobile was to be a vehicle for everyday wear and tear business, professional and family use, a vehicle that would be loved by all for its compactness, its simplicity, its safety, and its all-round convenience. Ford was also determined to keep the price down to a reasonable level where it would be affordable to many thousands of families. The price that he fixed at the time was $850. In all of these features that Ford selected for the Ford Mobile, his motivation was the same, and that is, it was founded in a motto of selfless service to his countrymen. It was not as if obstacles didn't come in the way of Henry Ford's success. The most significant of these came from a clever lawyer called George Selden, who had applied for a patent on petrol-powered motor cars way back in 1879, and the patent was granted him by the Patent Office in 1895. By simply making additions to his application each time a new modification took place on a car, Selden was able throughout the years to become a rich man by doing nothing but sitting back and collecting a license fee of 0.25% from every car that was ever produced in the United States. Other automobile manufacturers who had entered into the market by this time joined together and formed a trust. In the trust, they included Selden because they wanted to keep the competition out. They produced cars cheaply and sold them at a high profit because the general American public was quite ignorant at this time. This was an effort to keep Henry Ford out because these producers felt threatened by Henry Ford's high quality and low cost automobile. Ford had just about started producing his cars in a big way when he received a notice stating that unless he too bought into Selden's patent, he would be prosecuted. Although he was quite taken by surprise, Ford remained undaunted. He went to the newspapers and put in an advertisement stating simply that he and he alone was the pioneer for the production of petrol-powered motor cars in the United States. The people admired his simplicity, his courage, and his forthrightness, and his company was once more flooded with orders. Ford felt the need to conduct another race to once more establish the reputation of his car. This time, he beat a Frenchman's record in a fraction of a second and quite by accident. Once more, his name and his fame was spread all across the American tabloids, and he became a name to be reckoned with. Although the court cases were piling up, Ford's reputation in the American world was also mounting side by side. Thus, by 1908, the 5-year-old company was producing 4 times as many cars as any other company in the world. Ford was now busy with building the biggest ever factory for the production of automobiles anywhere in the world. It was here that Ford was planning to introduce for the first time his concept of the assembly line, utilizing his conveyor belt method of mass production for motor cars. It was in this manner that he had planned to make the Model T cheaper and faster than any car that had been built before. And what was Ford's plan for the Model T? It was to be a utility car with very few parts. There were going to be no frills in order that Ford could keep the costs down so that the average American family could easily afford to buy one. The body he was planning to make with steel. This would make it stronger and at the same time lighter and therefore he would be able to achieve higher levels of speed than ever before. Also, Ford planned to keep the price down to around $950. In addition, this car would give better mileage at 22 miles per gallon than had ever been given before. Prior to this, the record was at 10 miles per gallon. And furthermore, Ford promised that the new tires would give users 10,000 miles of trouble-free service. With all of these features, Ford's car, the Ford T, beat the features of any other car that was available on the market at that time. Ford's competitors rubbished all his claims, saying that the car was a flimsy contraption that would fall to pieces the moment that it came on the road. They were terribly jealous of his increasing popularity and the unstoppable sales of his cars, and so they resorted to maligning his product when they found that they could not get at Ford in any other way. They named the Model T Tin Lizzie, hoping that this car would become the laughing stock of all of America. Instead of that, it just went on to become the most famous, most popular and most driven car, not only in America but all across the countries of the world. Herein lies an important lesson for us. It's really important to be able to rise above the sniggers of our detractors. If we get pulled down by their harsh words and their criticism, then we're only giving them the permission to succeed in their attempts to pull us down. But when we learn to laugh with them, we retain our side of the victory. Ford was a man who knew well how to laugh at himself. There were many ridiculous and funny stories that were afloat about his Tin Lizzie and the Model T. But Ford never allowed any of these stories to pull him down. In fact, he let them pass around because on many an occasion, the stories about his Tin Lizzie went ahead of the car and made him and his vehicle well known before people had even set eyes on his actual product. For instance, one joke on his Model T stated that the man who says that he never gets rattled has never had a ride in a Tin Lizzie. This did not upset Henry Ford at all, but he just allowed the humor to do the work of publicity for his product. The Model T was introduced to the American public in a most unusual way. A contest was arranged and cars were invited to drive right across from the east to the west coast of the United States, a distance of 4,000 miles. Only 5 cars showed up to participate, out of which 2 were Tin Lizzies. After surmounting tremendous obstacles, mountainous terrain, uncharted areas, places where there were no roads, only 1 car survived to make it to the end of the race. And you guessed it, that was one of Henry Ford's Tin Lizzies. Now established as one of the most sturdy and reliable cars available on the market, Ford thought he had nothing to worry about when, bang, another obstacle came his way. He received a court notice upholding Selden's patent and the information that he had been violating the patent ever since he had started producing cars. This came as a terrible blow to Henry Ford, but undeterred, he went ahead and appealed to a higher court. After spending a great deal of money and going through many anxious months of waiting, the judgment was finally found to be in favor of Henry Ford, upholding his argument and discounting that of George Selden and the trust. Again, Henry Ford had won an amazing victory. Now there was no stopping him. Production figures skyrocketed. The new factory with the conveyor belt system began to produce cars in the thousands. In 1914, when Ford was 50 years old, his company showed a profit of $25 million. This was an amazing feat for one man to have achieved in a single lifetime, starting from scratch and creating an empire of such a stature. It was not until 1927 that Ford felt the need to revamp the Model T. It was now that he began work on a new model that was radically different from the previous car. However, it retained the same features which had earned Ford their reputation as a company: the sturdiness, affordability, and reliability. These became and have remained as the buzzwords that describe a Ford vehicle even today. Meanwhile, the plant also turned out other kinds of vehicles like ambulances, vans, and tractors. During the Second World War, Ford got actively involved in making anything that had a motor and would be useful, from jeeps to aeroplanes and ships. Ford, the master planner, built the largest factory in the world called Willow Run to turn out giant bombers and military tanks. It was around about this time that tragically Ford lost his only son Edsel, who was at the age of 50, to an illness. From here on, Ford began to groom his grandson Henry Ford II to take over this huge empire that he had established. Henry Ford was not going to take over just a vast financial empire, but the far greater weight of a moral responsibility to a nation. For the name Ford had become associated with integrity, with reliability, with durability, and with economy, and with a real passion to serve the American public. And such a responsibility could not be taken lightly, not by Henry Ford at least. And so he spent long hours investing in his little grandson, Henry Ford II, training him to become the worthy inheritor of such an amazing inheritance. What an amazing story. What an inspiring life. And we are going to look further in another episode at some of the lessons that we can learn and glean from a life that was so nobly lived about 100 years ago. In our next episode, and I look forward to you being there and sharing some of these insights at that time.